Hi, my name is Isabelle Carter. I am 27 years old and have just completed my master's program in finance at New York University. On graduation day, I put on my deep blue gown and stepped onto the stage to the solemn music and the thunderous applause echoing through the hall. Around me, my classmates were cheered for, called by name, embraced proudly by their parents, with bright bouquets tossed into the air. But when I turned my head slightly toward the audience, all I saw was a row of cold, empty seats. There were no flowers, no signs of encouragement, and no one from my family who cared to witness the moment I had sacrificed 5 long years to achieve. The only photo I have from that day is one where I stand alone among a sea of radiant faces, my smile so forced that when I look back at it now, even I feel estranged from it. I wasn't surprised, but the sting was still sharp. For years, I had grown used to my parents' indifference and favoritism. To them, my achievements were nothing extraordinary. They believed that as a daughter, I was meant to shoulder burdens, to sacrifice, to simply endure. On the day of my graduation, instead of pride, they acted as if I did not exist. What I did not know was that later that night, when I returned to the house whose every mortgage payment had been drawn from my own account, I would be dealt an even harsher blow. My mother would look me in the eye and tell me to start packing, to give up the house to Daniel, the son they had always treated like a treasure. They thought I would cry, beg, or plead, but I only smiled. Because they had no idea that I had been preparing for this day for a very long time, and the price they would pay would be far greater than they could ever imagine. Before I tell you the rest, I want to ask you, whoever you are, listening to my story now, have you ever been abandoned by your own family at the most important moment of your life? And where are you listening to this story from today? That evening, after the ceremony had ended, I drove back home. The 2-story house with its gray shingle roof appeared before me, every brick in its walls a reminder of the nights I bent my back to keep it standing through countless mortgage payments. The air was cool, the early summer wind slipping beneath my collar, but that chill was nothing compared to the icy ache in my chest as I thought about my family not even bothering to show up for my graduation. I parked the car, walked through the front door. The faint scent of jasmine tea drifted in the air. In the living room, my mother, Linda, sat leisurely on the leather sofa, one leg crossed over the other, holding a white ceramic mug with the Brooklyn Bridge printed on it. I froze for a moment. That was the very mug I had bought her one Christmas, using the money I had saved from a part-time job during my final year of college. Back then, I thought a small gift might show her how much I cared. But now, seeing that mug in her hand, it felt like a bitter symbol of irony. The gift I gave her remained, but I myself had never been valued. She took a sip of tea and spoke with a calm, deliberate tone, laced with hidden malice. Daniel is about to get married. He needs a new space to prepare for his own family. You're independent, aren't you? Prove it. Pack your things and give this house to your brother. Her words fell slowly, almost with a sense of satisfaction, as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Each syllable landed cold and heavy. I lifted my eyes toward my father, Robert, who sat in the chair beside her, a newspaper slack in his hands. He said nothing, only gave a slight nod of agreement, as if his silence was all the approval she needed. His face was expressionless, void of even a hint of compassion. I had once hoped my father might take my side, but instead he remained a shadow, always complicit in whatever my mother decided. My younger brother, Daniel, leaned against the door frame, arms folded across his chest. A smug smile spread across his face, as if he had finally won some competition he had been playing alone all these years. His eyes gleamed with mockery, and he didn't bother to hide it. I had supported him for so many years, paying his tuition, covering the maintenance of the car he drove, even funding the international trips he bragged about to his friends. And yet here he was, grinning as I was cast out of the very house I had carried on my shoulders. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady, but each word carried its full weight. For the past 5 years, every mortgage payment, every property tax, every repair bill came from my account. I paid for it all. This house stands today because of me. I looked straight into my mother's eyes, searching for even the slightest flicker of doubt, some spark of conscience. But she only curled her lips into a smirk, her tone dripping with disdain. That's a daughter's responsibility. You had the privilege of an education, you have a stable job, supporting the family is only natural. Daniel is the future of this family. He needs this house to begin his new life. Her words cut through me like a blade. Responsibility? Were those endless nights I worked until 2 or 3 in the morning just to meet deadlines nothing more than a duty? Were the days I lived on instant noodles to save money nothing but an obligation? I had sacrificed my youth so this family could live under a safe roof, yet I was always treated as expendable, existing only to carry the weight for everyone else. I turned to my father, asking one final time, my voice low but firm. Dad, are you certain that what Mom just said is also what you believe? Do you truly want your daughter to leave the house I've paid for, dollar by dollar, for 5 years, just so Daniel can have it? He stayed silent. And that silence was more brutal than any words. It was consent. It was the final blow that shattered every fragile illusion I had ever held about a father's love. In that moment, the room grew suffocating. My mother stared at me without a trace of hesitation, my father buried his eyes in the newspaper as if hiding, and Daniel chuckled under his breath, his satisfied grin burning into me. I understood then that I had my answer not through words, but through their complicit silence and their cold, unflinching eyes. I did not cry, I did not beg. My heart felt frozen, and in that stillness I realized I had been preparing for this day all along. I only smiled, a cold, sharp smile that for a fleeting moment stripped them of their usual confidence. I rose to my feet and walked toward the staircase. When the bedroom door closed behind me, I knew my life had just taken a turn. They believed they had pushed me into a corner. What they did not realize was that at that very moment, I had begun rewriting my own story, and it would mark the beginning of the end for them, a price they would eventually have to pay. I sat beside the open suitcase, carefully folding my familiar clothes into neat stacks, yet my mind kept replaying the years that had led me here. Every shirt, every notebook, every pair of shoes I touched felt like a relic, reminding me of the battles I had fought to get this far. I grew up in this house, yet never once did it feel like it truly belonged to me. The very house they now demanded I leave had been saved from foreclosure only because I poured my youth, my strength, and every ounce of determination into it. I remembered those first days of college. My mother was unemployed, and my father worked unstable, temporary jobs. Tuition and living expenses piled high, and I knew if I didn't step in, we would lose even the roof over our heads. I studied while working part-time jobs, waiting tables at cafes, assisting in offices, never turning down an opportunity to earn. At night, while my friends went out, I sat alone in a corner of the dormitory, entering data, drafting reports, and building financial models for small clients. The pay was meager, but every paycheck went toward the mortgage, month after month. Each payment was made on time, without fail, and it was those payments that kept the house standing for the past 5 years. Yet, instead of being grateful, my parents gradually treated it all as if it were nothing more than the natural order of things. During the stretches when they were unemployed, they sat comfortably at home while I scrambled under an exhausting work schedule. There were months when I not only had to cover the mortgage but also the utility bills and even the groceries. Many times, I skipped meals just to make sure everything was paid. On holidays, when my friends were being whisked away on trips by their parents, I stayed behind in my small room, calculating every dollar to keep our family afloat. Daniel, my younger brother, was a different story. He never had to worry about anything. From high school onward, my parents spoiled him without restraint. His first car? I was the one who signed for the loan. His college tuition? Even while drowning in my own debts, I was forced to shoulder most of it. I remember one time Daniel wanted to go on a trip to Europe with his friends. My mother turned to me with expectant eyes. Isabelle, your brother deserves youthful experiences too. You have a job now, help him a little. I signed the check in silence, my heart weighed down like stone. To them, my sacrifice was never a gift, never an act of love, it was simply my duty. For years, I endured endless comparisons until I was numb. A daughter must sacrifice, must put the family first, my mother repeated like a mantra. And whenever I resisted, she would give me that scolding look and remind me, Daniel is a son, he needs a solid foundation. You, on the other hand, will marry one day. You don't need as much. Those words were like dull blades, not sharp enough to end me, but persistent enough to carve away at my heart, leaving me breathless from the constant pain. I was never acknowledged as an individual of my own, only as a shadow standing behind, shielding what they called the family's future Daniel. I remembered a winter night in my third year of college. Outside, snow blanketed everything in white while I curled up in my small room, typing a financial analysis report for a Wall Street client. My fingers were stiff with cold, but I couldn't stop working, because the bank would withdraw the mortgage payment in the morning. Meanwhile, Daniel was partying in Miami, posting pictures of his bright, carefree smile. Beneath those photos, my mother commented, "My brilliant son, enjoying life the way he should." I read those words in the dark, feeling as though I did not exist at all. Once, I asked my mother, "Have you ever thought that I too need to be loved and acknowledged?" She only gave a faint, dismissive smile. A daughter shouldn't ask for too much. Your duty is to keep this family standing. One day, you'll understand. But today, when they outright told me to pack my things and leave, I finally understood that my sacrifices had never been recognized. They were nothing more than excuses, a way for them to continue exploiting my silence and my labor. Those memories flooded back, pressing heavily against my chest as I placed the last of my finance books into the suitcase. I ran my hand along the spine of an old textbook, recalling the countless sleepless nights when I balanced part-time work, coursework, and financial calculations just to scrape together enough money to send home. Each yellowed page was proof of a youth drained dry. The present pulled me back as the wheels of my suitcase squeaked against the floor. I stood, gripping the handle tightly, and took one last look around the room. A few family photos from my childhood still sat on the bookshelf, but they felt like artifacts from another life, foreign and distant. I walked down the stairs, past the living room where my parents and Daniel still sat, as if nothing had just happened. No one said a word to stop me. Not a single glance of regret met my eyes. I opened the door and the night air rushed in. Stepping over the threshold, I felt as if a portion of the weight I had carried for years had finally lifted from my shoulders. I pulled my suitcase behind me, quiet but resolute. I did not cry. I only smiled, a cold, cutting smile, because I knew the days when they saw me as nothing more than a shadow carrying the burden for someone else were over. From this moment on, they would have to learn to live without the so-called default responsibility named Isabelle Carter. The taxi took me back to Manhattan, to the small studio I had placed a deposit on just a week earlier. Yes, I had been prepared. For months, I had sensed this day would come, the day they would drop their masks completely and cast me aside without hesitation. As I stepped into the cramped studio on the Lower East Side, I took a long breath. The space was barely 30 square meters, with exposed brick walls and a single small window looking out onto rows of neighboring buildings, but it felt more peaceful than anywhere I had ever lived. Here, there were no sighs of disapproval from my mother, no reproachful glances from my father, no smug smirks from Daniel. Only me, and silence. I sat down on the thin mattress I had quickly laid out and placed my worn leather backpack on the table. Unzipping it, I pulled out the file I had been carefully assembling for years. Mortgage papers, the purchase contract for the house, bank statements spanning 5 long years. All of it in my name, with my signature, every figure undeniable. I ran my hand across the cover of the file, and a storm of emotion surged inside me, a mixture of pain and pride. Pain, because I had been forced to prepare evidence against my own parents. Pride, because at last, the sacrifices I had carried in silence would finally have a voice. No one could deny them. I knew I could not fight this battle alone, and one name immediately surfaced in my mind. Allison Reed. Allison had been my classmate in financial analysis at NYU. We had stayed up through countless nights working on group projects, passing cups of coffee back and forth just to survive brutal exams. After graduation, she had chosen law and was now a real estate attorney at a respected firm in Manhattan. I still remembered the last time I saw her, at a conference last year. She had smiled and said, "If you ever run into trouble with property or housing, call me, we'll figure it out." At the time, I had laughed it off. Little did I know, those words would become my lifeline. I picked up my phone, my hand trembling slightly. It took me a few seconds before I could bring myself to press the call button. On the other end, a familiar voice answered. "Isabelle? Oh my God, it's been so long. How have you been?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "I need you, Allison. I'm in trouble with my house. No, more accurately, with my parents." I heard her sigh softly, then she said, "Tell me everything from the beginning." And so I did. I told her about the graduation ceremony where not a single family member showed up, about the cold conversation in the living room, about the shameless demand that I hand the house over to Daniel. I described the smug smile on my brother's face and my father's hollow nod of agreement. When I reached the part where I dragged my suitcase out the door, my voice broke. Allison stayed silent for a moment, then spoke with firm clarity. "Isabelle, you need to remember this. If every document, every contract, every mortgage is in your name, then that house is legally yours. No one has the right to force you out, and no one has the right to take it away. Meet me tomorrow morning. I'll review the validity of your paperwork and figure out the best course of action for you." I ended the call and sat quietly for a long while. Outside, the traffic of Manhattan roared endlessly, but inside that tiny studio I felt an odd sense of peace. I knew, from that very moment, I was no longer the obedient Isabelle who stayed silent while my parents pulled the strings. I had stepped onto a new path, and with Allison by my side, I would write the rest of my story the way I chose, not the way they dictated. The next morning, I went to meet Allison at her law office in the heart of Manhattan. The glass tower reflected the early sunlight, glittering like a reminder that the world outside kept moving forward, no matter the storms I had just endured. I stepped into the lobby, clutching the folder tightly against my chest, my mind tangled but my heart strangely calm. This was no longer the time to be weak. This was the time I would finally stand up and protect myself. Allison greeted me with a brief but warm embrace. She hadn't changed, her blonde hair tied neatly at the back, her sharp eyes carrying both intelligence and genuine care. "Isabelle, sit down. You brought all the documents, right?" I nodded and placed the thick folder on the polished wooden desk. She opened it and began flipping through page after page, her eyes moving quickly over the fine print. I noticed her fingers tapping lightly on the table, as though she was already calculating every possible step in her mind. After nearly half an hour of reviewing, Allison looked up, her voice steady and certain. "Nothing could be clearer. Isabelle, you are the sole legal owner of the house. Every contract, every mortgage, every payment record is in your name. Your parents and your brother have no ownership rights whatsoever. They are merely residents, and their living there has only been possible because of your goodwill." I let out a long breath, as if releasing a weight I had carried for years. But right after came a pang of sorrow, because that truth also meant that all the sacrifices I had made were never once acknowledged by them, and now it had to be validated by law. Allison set her pen down and looked directly into my eyes. "Listen, the fastest and most definitive way is to sell the house. You can keep it, of course, but that would only allow them to cling to it and keep pressuring you. If you want them to understand what real loss feels like, then cut ties completely. Sell it, take the money that rightfully belongs to you, and begin your new life." Her words echoed through the quiet office. I sat still for a few seconds, staring out the window at the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan, standing tall and proud. Selling the house, it meant severing the final tie between me and them. But perhaps that was the only true path to freedom. "I know it's not easy to decide," Allison continued, her voice softening. "But Isabelle, remember this, it's not just four walls, it's a burden that drained away your youth. That house turned you into a shadow they could exploit. If you want freedom, you have to let it go. I nodded slowly. She was right. The house had never truly been a home. It had only been a monument to injustice. I turned to Allison, my eyes resolute. Make it clear, make it legal, make it undeniable. I want this to end, once and for all. A faint smile crossed Allison's face. There she is. That's the Isabelle I remember, strong and decisive. She pulled a stack of papers from her drawer and placed it in front of me. This is the authorization form. Sign here, and I'll represent you in putting the house on the real estate market. We'll have it listed within the week. Every step will be legal, and no one can stop it. I picked up the pen and stared at the neatly printed lines. In that instant, a flood of memories rushed back every time I scraped together a mortgage payment from meager part-time wages. Every night I buried myself in numbers while Daniel lived carefree. All of it now culminated in this single act of signing. I drew in a deep breath, then pressed the pen firmly to the page. My signature carved itself across the document, a final affirmation that I had chosen my path. Allison gathered the papers, organizing them neatly before sliding them into a large folder. It's done. I'll coordinate with a broker. In just a few days, the name Isabelle Carter will appear on the New Jersey real estate listings. And when that happens, your family will have no way to deny the truth. I looked at her, gratitude swelling inside me. In that moment, Allison wasn't just a lawyer. She was the lifeline I had finally grasped after years of drowning in injustice. Leaving the law office, I stepped onto the street with a weightless feeling I could barely describe. The rush of people, the blaring horns, the chaos of Manhattan, all of it sounded like a symphony heralding my new beginning. I knew that within days, the door I had closed on my family would slam shut for good, and they would finally face the cost of their disregard. I was no longer the daughter forced to sacrifice. I was Isabelle Carter, the owner, the decision-maker, and now, the one rewriting the rules. Just 3 days after signing the authorization, the silence inside the Carter household was shattered. One morning, heavy knocks echoed against the wooden door of 17 Maple Street. Linda Carter opened it, still in her purple bathrobe, a cup of tea in hand. Standing outside was a neatly dressed real estate agent holding a folder. He smiled politely and handed her a business card. Good morning, Mrs. Carter. I'm here to discuss the fact that this property has been listed on the real estate market. We'll begin preparations for the first showing next week. Linda froze, her face draining pale before flushing red in a matter of seconds. Listed? What do you mean, listed? This is our house. Who gave you permission to do this? The agent remained calm. Ma'am, all legal documents are in the name of the owner, Miss Isabelle Carter. I received direct authorization from her attorney. The paperwork is complete. I'm simply here to inform you. With that, he bowed politely and turned to leave, leaving Linda stunned and speechless on the doorstep. About 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed nonstop. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I knew this storm of anger was inevitable. I answered, and her shrill voice burst through the line. Isabelle, you can't do this. This is the family home. We live here. Do you understand? Are you really going to throw your own parents out on the street? I sat calmly in the small chair of my studio apartment, taking a measured sip of coffee. My voice was steady, unwavering. You're right, Mother, you live there. But you're forgetting one thing. The ownership of that house belongs to me. For 5 years, who made every single mortgage payment? Who signed the contract? Not you, not Dad, and certainly not Daniel. There has only ever been one name, Isabelle Carter. On the other end, I heard her choke for a moment before her voice rose into a furious scream. That's a daughter's responsibility. How could you? Daniel is about to get married, he needs a home. And what about us? What are we supposed to do? I let out a bitter laugh. Responsibility? Then what do you call all the years I carried the weight for this family? Wasn't that responsibility enough? And what about a parent's love for their daughter? Was that ever treated as a responsibility? Did you ever once ask what I needed? Suddenly, my father's voice cut in cold, firm, unyielding. Isabelle, I'm warning you to stop this. If you have any sense of decency left, cancel the sale. Otherwise, we'll sue. Do you hear me? We'll take you to court. I paused for a few seconds, then answered with absolute clarity. If you want to sue, then sue. But before you do, read carefully the documents my lawyer just sent to your email. The deed is in my name, the bank statements show 5 consecutive years of payments from my account, and the mortgage contract bears my signature. If you think you stand a chance of winning, be my guest. With that, I hung up. I knew Allison had prepared everything thoroughly. Sure enough, just an hour later, Allison called, her voice edged with a quiet laugh. I've sent them the full legal file, the deed, the original contracts, the bank statements. If they still threaten a lawsuit, it'll be the same as signing their own defeat. I exhaled, relieved, though there was bitterness beneath it. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd need a lawyer to defend myself against my own parents. Back in the New Jersey house, Linda slammed her teacup down so hard that liquid spilled across the tablecloth. Robert's face stiffened, but he had no counter left to argue. The two of them glanced at each other, then turned to Daniel, waiting for him to say something. But he sat there stunned, his eyes avoiding theirs. He couldn't believe that the house he had always assumed would be the foundation of his future didn't belong to him at all. His smug confidence crumbled, replaced by confusion and fear. Linda began frantically tapping her phone, sending message after message to me. Isabelle, stop this, I'm begging you. You can't do this to us. I can't bear the humiliation. Daniel's wedding is coming, are you really going to ruin everything? I glanced at the screen, then set the phone down without replying. A strange calm settled over me. For years, they had used my silence as a tool to impose their will. But now, it was my silence that became the weapon unraveling their control. That afternoon, Allison called with an update. The broker has confirmed it. The Carter house is officially listed. Within 2 weeks, there'll be an open house. Isabelle, brace yourself. Your family won't accept this easily, but they no longer have the power to stop it. I nodded. There was no trembling left inside me, only resolve. They had cast me out of that house, and now I would show them what true loss really meant. Across town, Linda and Robert sat in the living room, staring at the familiar walls that suddenly felt foreign. Every corner, every doorway reminded them that the house still stood only because of Isabelle, the daughter they had never valued. Panic seeped into their breaths, but they clung desperately to useless threats and empty reproaches. Meanwhile, I sat by the window of my Manhattan studio, the sunset spilling across my shoulders, whispering to myself, this game has only just begun. A week after that furious phone call, my parents sent me a message asking to meet at the house in New Jersey. My mother's text was curt, "Come back, let's talk this through once and for all." When I read it, I felt no trace of nerves. I knew this wasn't a conversation to reconcile. It would be the final confrontation, where every truth would be laid bare. That evening, I returned to Maple Street. The familiar 2-story house appeared in the fading light, but it no longer felt like home. To me, it was nothing more than an asset waiting to be liquidated. As I stepped into the living room, I saw my parents and Daniel already seated, the air heavy with tension. On the wooden table, I placed a thick folder, neatly clipped with documents, the drafted sales contract, the mortgage papers bearing my name, and a detailed ledger of 5 years' expenses, taxes, repairs, insurance, every cent accounted for. Linda's eyes narrowed at the sight of the papers. "What are you planning to do with all this? We're family. Do we really need to calculate every little thing?" I sat down, my voice calm but edged with steel. Family? A family that didn't bother to show up on my graduation day? A family that treated my paying the mortgage as a duty, as if it were nothing? A family that tried to throw me out of the very house under my name? If you already see me as a stranger, then today, we'll speak in numbers. I opened the expense ledger and spoke clearly, my voice unwavering. Who paid $1,800 to repair the collapsed roof in the winter of 2020? When the snowstorm caved it in, who emptied their savings to hire workers? The room was silent. My mother's face flushed, her eyes avoiding mine. My father stared down at the floor. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet my gaze. I turned to the next page. Who covered the entire cost of Grandma's funeral last year? When none of you had even $1 to spare, who pulled out a credit card and paid over $6,000 to make sure she had a proper burial? Who worked overtime for months afterward to pay off that debt? My father inhaled deeply, his hand trembling as he gripped the armrest tighter. He gave no answer. I pressed on, my tone sharper with every word. And who paid the $12,000 in hospital bills when Daniel crashed his car 2 years ago? When he got drunk, drove into a lamppost, and needed 14 stitches, who stood up and paid the medical costs to prevent a lawsuit? Was it you, Mom? You, Dad? Or was it me? Daniel paled, his lips trembling. He muttered, You didn't have to bring that up." I locked eyes with him. "I do have to bring it up. Because for years, no one in this family remembered. Only I did. Every dollar. Every cent." I slid the folder across the table toward them, my voice resolute. "Here is the proof. Every bill, every payment, all from my account. This house has stood for the last 5 years on the sweat and sacrifice of my labor. And now, I've made my decision. I will sell this house. Not for money, but because I need to recalculate the entire life I've carried on behalf of this family." I gathered the documents and stood. "You have 1 week to leave. After that, the open house will take place. If you refuse, the law will force you out." I have nothing more to say. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother's sobs, my father's weary sigh, Daniel's muttered curses. But to me, they were nothing more than echoes fading into the distance. As I stepped out of that house, the evening sun washed over me, and I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. A faint smile touched my lips. I knew this was the ending they had forced me to deliver back to them. And for the first time in years, I felt as though I had finally reclaimed my own voice. But Linda was never one to sit quietly in defeat. She had always lived by manipulating the emotions of others, and this time was no different. That very night, she logged onto Facebook, opened the extended family group with nearly 50 members, uncles, aunts, cousins, even distant relatives, and began typing a long post. Every word was carefully chosen, laced with imaginary tears, painting the picture of a heartbroken mother betrayed by her own daughter. The post began with melodramatic grief. "All my life, I have raised my daughter, worried about her every meal and every night's sleep. And yet, right after her graduation, she coldly threw her parents out of the family home and even plans to sell it for money. I have never felt such pain." Below her words, Linda attached several old photos, a 15-year-old Isabelle in a white dress standing proudly beside her parents, the whole family gathered around a Christmas tree, smiling as if nothing had ever been broken. These pictures were used as her evidence, crafted to convince everyone that this had once been a happy family and Isabelle was the ungrateful child who destroyed it. Within minutes, the comments began pouring in. Aunt Carol was the first to chime in, leaving a reproachful note. "Isabelle, did you really do this? After all the years your parents raised you, how could you?" Uncle Mike was harsher, his anger spilling out through his words. "Unbelievable. Kids these days go off to college and then turn their backs on their families. Isabelle, you bring shame to the whole bloodline." A cousin, who had never liked me, added fuel to the fire. "See? She went to school in New York and now looks down on her New Jersey roots. She only cares about money, not family." My phone began vibrating nonstop. Messenger, iMessage, even my personal email filled with accusations. An aunt wrote, "You need to reconsider. No daughter should do something this cruel." An uncle added, "If you go through with this, your mother will break down." This is unfilial. Some relatives were even more blunt. "Daniel is about to get married. Are you trying to ruin your brother's happiness?" Before I could finish reading, the phone kept ringing again and again. A few family members called directly, repeating the same old refrain. "Family comes first." Their voices carried a mix of reproach, threats, and pleading. I sat in my tiny Manhattan studio, the glow of the phone screen lighting up my face. Each message felt like a needle pricking at old wounds, but strangely, I wasn't surprised. I had grown up being cast as the one at fault. The Carter family always knew how to twist the narrative, turning my sacrifices into obligations and turning me into the villain the moment I refused to keep carrying the load. Now, they were simply extending that tactic to the wider family circle, building a wall of pressure to force me into submission. The backlash reached its peak when I received an email from my mother. The subject line screamed in capital letters, "Stop this nonsense." I opened it, each sentence cut like a blade. "I've told the entire family, and everyone agrees you are disgraceful. If you continue, we will all see you as a traitor. Think about it, who will ever invite you to family gatherings again? Do you want to live alone for the rest of your life?" I reached the final line and felt my lips curve into a faint smile. The truth was, I had been living alone for a long time, ever since the day they chose Daniel as the center of everything and reduced me to a shadow carrying the weight. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed out all the messages, took screenshots of Linda's post and the comments, and compiled them into a single file. I forwarded it straight to Allison with a short note. "This is how they're reacting." Less than an hour later, Allison called me back, her voice steady. "See? This is textbook manipulation. They have no legal ground to stand on, so they resort to attacking your honor and emotions. But Isabelle, don't worry, we'll add every bit of this to the case file. If they try to wield honor as a weapon, we'll counter with legal truth. And remember, true honor doesn't lie in words on the internet, it lies in evidence." I stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Allison's words felt like a pin piercing through the fog in my mind. She was right. All those accusations could never change the truth. I was the one who paid the mortgage. I was the sole legal owner of the house. No Facebook post could twist that fact. That night, I sat before the glow of my phone, staring at dozens of unread notifications. One message stood out from Aunt Carol. Her words were short, almost pleading. "Dear, go back, apologize to your parents, it's not too late." I sighed, then let out a cold smile. For the first time in years, I felt no trembling under the weight of their pressure. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and typed one final response, sent to all of them. "Thank you for your concern, but the truth will speak for itself. Please wait." I shut off my phone and lay back on the bed. Outside the window, Manhattan's lights glittered like stars. In that moment, I knew the emotional battle they tried to trap me in no longer had power over me. And for the first time, I felt peace in my own silence. The first open house was only a few days away when Allison asked me to return to the house in New Jersey. This time, she wanted me to stand there myself, alongside the legal team, to put an end to any resistance my family still clung to. When I stepped into the familiar living room, Linda and Robert were already seated, their faces drawn and weary. Daniel leaned against the stair railing, his eyes darting away, unable to meet mine. The air was heavy, thick with finality. Everyone knew this meeting would be the endgame. Allison set a folder down on the table, her voice calm and measured. "We're here to have one last conversation. The property has been listed, and the transaction will proceed within 2 weeks. But before we take the final step, Isabelle has something else she wants the family to know." I opened my leather case and pulled out another stack of papers I had guarded carefully for 2 years. These papers had once been the nightmare I tried to bury. But today, they had become the evidence that would deliver the final blow. I looked straight at my parents, then laid the stack of papers on the table, my voice cold and steady. "This is a $25,000 loan taken out at Community Trust Bank 2 years ago. The borrower's name is Isabelle Carter me. But the strange thing is, I never signed for this loan." I flipped to the first page and pointed to the signature line. "This isn't my signature, this is a forgery." Linda's face drained of color, her hands visibly trembling. Robert froze, his fingers locked tightly together. Daniel retreated 2 steps up the staircase, stammering, "Whoa, where did you get that?" I answered without hesitation. "During a routine review of my bank statements, I found this loan. When I went to the bank to verify, the staff showed me the file." They believed I had signed it, but the moment I saw the handwriting, I knew it wasn't mine. I stayed silent, kept the copies as evidence. And now, the time has come to expose it. Allison spoke next, her voice hard as steel. Forgery of a signature to obtain a loan in someone else's name is fraud, a serious crime. If Isabelle chooses, we can file charges immediately and pursue criminal prosecution. The penalty could include years in prison, not to mention full repayment of the loan plus accrued interest. Linda broke down, tears spilling onto the table. She shook her head, her voice shaking. I only wanted to help Daniel. He was about to lose his scholarship. We needed money fast. I didn't know what else to do. I thought you'd never find out. Her words dissolved into sobs, part excuse, part plea. Robert sat motionless, his eyes vacant. He knew there was no way to deny it. He had been the one to forge the signature, his hand too familiar with every curve of the letters. He bowed his head, unable to utter a word. Danielle's face went pale. I didn't know anything. I just remember Mom and Dad saying everything was handled. Then he spun around and fled upstairs, the slam of his door echoing through the house. I watched it all unfold, but the sharp pain I once felt was gone. My heart had grown numb. I spoke only one sentence, my voice cutting through the silence. On graduation day, you told me I was independent, that I had to take care of my own life. Well, now it's true. I am independent from this family. Other Dawn. Linda burst into tears, but I felt no trace of pity. Robert sat frozen like a statue, as if finally realizing the price of all those years of exploitation and silent complicity. Allison calmly gathered the files and closed the folder with a final warning. We don't intend to take this to court, but if you continue to interfere, I will submit all of this evidence to the prosecutor. And when that happens, no one will be able to save you. I rose to my feet, collected the expense records I had laid out the week before, and let my eyes wander over the room one last time. Memories flooded back, meals weighed down by tension, long nights spent working while they slept soundly. Yet, instead of heaviness, this time I felt a profound release. I had spoken the truth, presented every piece of evidence, and had nothing left to hide. As I turned to leave, my mother's stifled sobs mingled with the ticking of the clock. The door closed behind me, dividing two worlds. One was the old world of manipulation and injustice. The other was the new one, where I, Isabelle Carter, was free to write my own future, no longer bound by ties that only carried the name of family. For the first time, I felt with absolute clarity that truth had spoken, and its edge was sharper than any lie. And in that final silence, I knew the game was over. The house on Maple Street was sold in less than 2 weeks. The open house drew plenty of interest, and after a few rounds of negotiation, the deal closed at a price higher than I had even hoped for. On the day the keys were handed over, I didn't return. Allison signed the final papers on my behalf, while I sat in my tiny Manhattan studio, watching the email confirmation appear on my screen. The 6-figure sum glowed brightly, and I exhaled in relief. 5 years of burden had finally materialized into something tangible. But for the Carter family, this was only the beginning of their downfall. They no longer had a home. Once the sale of the house was finalized, Linda and Robert were forced to pack their belongings and move into a cramped rental apartment on the outskirts of Newark. From a spacious 2-story house with a garden, they had fallen into a rundown unit with stained walls and dim, narrow hallways. Linda, who had always boasted to relatives online, no longer dared to post on Facebook. She knew that if she shared pictures of this new place, the entire family would see the humiliating decline. She spent her days crying into a pillow in the tiny kitchen, while Robert sat for hours in front of an old television, his eyes hollow and vacant. The forged loan they had taken in my name could not remain hidden. Allison never needed to take it to court, but in professional circles, word spread quickly. The company where Robert had worked for years began to suspect when whispers reached them. Before long, he was summoned to human resources. The director was blunt. "We cannot keep a financial manager tied to a signature forgery scandal." Even without prosecution, rumors alone are enough to destroy credibility. Robert left the company in silence, his personnel files stamped in red. Not eligible for rehire. Oh. Meanwhile, Linda was forced to scrape by selling nearly all the jewelry she had accumulated over the years. The gold bracelets, the diamond earrings she had once proudly flaunted to her friends, disappeared one by one, exchanged for rent checks, utility bills, and grocery receipts. She, who had once thrived on social outings, gradually withdrew, too ashamed to face anyone's eyes. Each time she heard the name Isabelle Carter, the daughter she had scorned, mentioned alongside news that I had just placed a deposit on a condominium near Wall Street, she felt her chest tighten as if crushed from within. And Daniel, the one who had been most favored, was finally forced to taste reality. His fiancée, Emily, who had once been thrilled to plan their wedding, grew uneasy when she learned the Carters had lost their house and their financial footing. One evening, she met Daniel at a cafe, her eyes heavy with regret. "I'm not sure I can go through with this. We have nothing to start a life together. You don't have a steady job, and now your family has no home." "I'm sorry, Daniel." She placed the engagement ring back on the table. Daniel sat stunned, begging her not to leave, but it was useless. The relationship unraveled in minutes, leaving him alone in the empty cafe, his eyes red with despair. From being the golden child shielded by our parents, Daniel plunged into an abyss of uncertainty. He began looking for work, but his resume was empty, with nothing to show beyond a handful of odd jobs. The friends he once bragged and partied with slowly drifted away. Without the house to lean on and without a fiancé to flaunt, Daniel was, for the first time, forced to face the emptiness of his own life, a life I had carried on my back for years. While the Carter household spun deeper into crisis, I stepped into a new chapter. The money from the sale was enough for me to place a deposit on my own apartment near Wall Street, just a few blocks from my firm. The day I signed the contract, my hand trembled not from fear, but from emotion. This wasn't a house my parents had left me, nor was it something handed down to Daniel. This was mine. The result of my effort alone. A space I could finally call home. The apartment was still unfinished, but standing on the balcony of the 20th floor, looking out at the shimmering lights of New York City, I knew I had left behind the shadows of that old house. Here, I was no longer the daughter who must sacrifice. Here, I was Isabelle Carter, a woman building her future with her own hands. Sometimes I still received the occasional message from relatives. "Isabelle, was it worth it to tear the family apart?" I would glance at the words, then quietly delete them. Because I knew the family had fractured long ago when they chose silence, when they chose exploitation, when they chose Daniel instead of me. What I did was nothing more than putting a final period at the end of a play that had dragged on far too long. And so, amid their unstoppable collapse, I found the beginning of my own life. I no longer looked back. The road ahead stretched wide open, and for the first time, I walked it with unburdened shoulders, carrying no one else's weight but my own. I moved into my new apartment on a clear weekend morning, sunlight streaming through the wide glass windows and flooding the room with warmth. The walls were painted a pristine white, the floor a pale wood, and a small balcony opened out over the bustling financial district of Wall Street. Everything was simple, but to me, it was freedom. No more judgmental stares, no more scolding voices hurled my way, no more weight of a house where I had been nothing more than the one carrying the debts. In this space, for the first time, I felt what true peace really was. Every day began the same. I woke early, pulled back the curtains to let the light pour in, brewed my own cup of coffee, and sat by the window reading financial news. I continued my work in data analysis, but this time it felt different. I wasn't working to race against mortgage deadlines or breaking myself to support others. Instead, I worked with passion, with the confidence that every effort I made was building a future solely for me. And soon, both effort and fortune began to smile on me. A major investment firm in New York noticed my work and sent me a formal invitation. I still remember sitting in their gleaming conference room as the HR director said, "We need someone like you, meticulous, resilient, and able to see what others overlook." I smiled softly. If only they knew that it was those years of forced burdens that had forged me into who I was today, they would have been even more astonished. The new job opened countless doors. I attended conferences, networking events in the investment world, bright lights, lively conversations, and every handshake carrying the possibility of opportunity. At one of those events, I met a young man in the same field, his eyes bright, his smile sincere. We spoke for a long time, trading thoughts about projects, dreams, and even the fears we rarely confessed. But this time, I didn't rush into a relationship as if I needed a lifeline. When he asked, half joking, half serious, "Do you think we should see each other again?" I simply smiled and replied, "I already have a life of my own." The answer surprised me with how light it felt in my heart. Because I knew I no longer needed anyone to fill a void. On late nights, I often sat by the window, gazing down at New York City shimmering with lights. The rush of traffic flowed like veins of fire, and the glowing towers rose like stars anchored to the ground. In those moments, I no longer felt small or invisible. I felt that I truly belonged here, part of the city, part of a future I had chosen for myself. My story did not end with tears or hatred, but with a simple truth. I had broken free from the chains called family. They once cast me out of the very house I had bled to keep standing, but they never realized I had been preparing for this all along. Independence, the very word they used to mock and dismiss me, had become the weapon that allowed me to reclaim myself. And now, I want to ask you, the one listening to my story, if you were in my place, would you forgive your parents after everything? And today, from where are you listening to this story?